Nothing and nobody will ever hurt you again. Keep these words of Carl Jung in mind. The world had never been a gentle place. From the earliest moments of awareness, life felt like a series of silent battles, small and large, spoken and unspoken. Every smile held a shadow, every embrace a hesitation. There were hands that touched but never truly held, voices that promised but never stayed, eyes that looked but never saw. And through it all, the soul carried its weight like a vessel filled with invisible wounds. But there comes a point when something deep within begins to whisper a different kind of truth. It does not scream. It does not demand. It arrives softly, like morning mist touching skin. It says, nothing and nobody will ever hurt you again. Not because pain has vanished, but because something fundamental has changed. The interpretation, the attachment, the permission, it is no longer granted. The gate once left open is now watched by the very soul that was once crushed beneath the weight of its own openness. In the beginning, there had been hope, not the kind that uplifts, but the kind that binds, a desperate kind of faith in people, in moments, in promises. Each letdown was a crack, each betrayal a deeper fracture, until one day, the structure within began to collapse. But collapse is not the end. Collapse is a chance to rebuild differently, not with fear, but with clarity, not with walls, but with boundaries. The distinction is everything. The journey from pain to peace is neither linear nor predictable. It begins where the voice within has been silenced the longest. In a dim corner of the heart, where self-abandonment masquerades as loyalty, where forgiveness becomes a burden, where silence feels safer than truth. That is where the awakening begins. Not all at once, not with fanfare, but slowly, like the shifting of tectonic plates beneath a vast ocean, invisible yet powerful. There are no saviors here, only the realization that salvation was always an internal process. Waiting for someone to come and make things right is like hoping the wind will rebuild what the fire destroyed. It may cool the ashes, but it cannot restore the shape. And so the rebuilding begins with hands that once trembled, a voice that once cracked, a heart that once bled. What was broken is not hidden, but acknowledged. What was lost is not mourned endlessly, but honored. The past is no longer a cage. It is now a museum, visited occasionally, but never inhabited. The old patterns resist this new way of being. They scream for attention, seduce with the familiarity of dysfunction, whisper that loneliness is worse than hurt. But the soul, now aware, chooses differently. No longer seeking validation, it finds strength in solitude. No longer fearing rejection, it recognizes redirection. No longer addicted to chaos, it embraces calm as the new courage. There is a stillness that arrives when the war ends, not the war outside, but the one within. It comes after the final surrender, not to others, but self. The surrender to truth, to limits, to needs. It is the recognition that saying no is not cruelty, and that walking away is not failure. That protection is not punishment. The heart, once wide open and vulnerable to everything, now opens with intention, selectively, wisely, with discernment born not of bitterness, but of growth. There is no vengeance here, no desire to make others hurt as one once did. There is only release, a letting go that feels less like giving up and more like rising up. What was once clung to is now gently placed down. The roles played, the masks worn, the personas adopted, they all fall away. What remains is real, unapologetic, unafraid. This path is not one of isolation, but of integration. The wounds are not erased. They are stitched with gold, like the ancient art of kintsugi. Every crack tells a story, not of damage, but of survival. Every scar is a testament to the resilience that now shapes every thought, every decision, every breath. The pain was not the teacher. The response to it was. Fear still visits, but it no longer rules. Doubt still whispers, but it is no longer obeyed. Memories still echo, but they no longer dictate direction. The soul now stands at the helm, steady in the storm, grounded in its own knowing. The compass is internal. The journey is inward. The destination is peace. Love still matters, but it no longer consumes. It flows, but it does not flood. It builds, but it does not bind. It is given freely, but not to prove worth. It is received openly, but not to fill emptiness. Love in this new space is not the cure, but the celebration. There is a kind of power in not needing to be understood, a liberation in choosing presence over performance, a quiet joy in walking away without the need to explain. What was once interpreted as coldness is now clarity. What was once loneliness is now sacred solitude. The soul no longer negotiates its value, no longer barters its truth, no longer pleads for belonging. The past no longer hurts because it no longer holds power. The future no longer frightens because it is not chased. The present is no longer endured, but inhabited fully. With each breath, there is a quiet promise. Nothing and nobody will ever hurt you again. Not because the world has changed, but because the self has. Because now, the gates are watched. The heart is honored. The mind is clear. The spirit is whole. And in that wholeness, there is space for everything. Grief and joy, pain and pleasure, silence and song. Everything has a place, but nothing has control. The soul, once scattered, now gathers itself like light through glass, focused, brilliant, unbroken. The world continues in its chaotic dance. People still come and go. Some speak love and mean it. Others speak love and don't. Some stay, some leave. But the self, now rooted, does not rise and fall with their tides. There is an anchoring, a groundedness that cannot be shaken. It is not armor. It is not numbness. It is presence. It is self-respect. Every wound once felt like identity. Now they are stories, not of what was lost, but of what was found. The truth beneath the pain, the wisdom beneath the tears, the freedom that comes when one stops chasing healing and starts embracing wholeness. To walk through life now is to walk with open eyes and a soft heart, guarded not by walls, but by discernment. To speak with kindness, but not compliance. To listen deeply, but not absorb what is not aligned. To give without depletion. To receive without guilt. To exist finally as one was always meant to, untouched by the chaos of others, unmoved by the judgments of the world. The voice inside no longer asks, "Why me?" It now says, even this is for me. Even the storm, even the silence, even the leaving. All of it was the fire that forged the core. And now, standing in the calm after the burn, there is no need to fear. Because truly, deeply, nothing and nobody will ever hurt you again. The shift was not dramatic to the outside world. There were no grand announcements, no visible revolutions. But internally, everything changed. What once triggered spirals now triggered reflection. What once demanded reaction now met stillness. The storms still arrived, but the soul no longer drowned in them. It became the sky, vast enough to hold the weather without being defined by it. There were still moments of ache. Echoes of old habits would occasionally rise, dressed in the disguise of new people or familiar temptations. But recognition grew sharper. The lens was clean now. What once looked like love was seen clearly as control. What once seemed like destiny was revealed to be a cycle. There was no bitterness in this scene, only gratitude for the awareness. The soul did not seek to punish, only to protect. And so the soul began to live differently, not reactively, but intentionally. It was no longer interested in proving worth, gaining approval, or earning belonging. It began to speak only when there was truth to offer, not silence to fill. It began to listen, not to collect information, but to understand deeply. And when things didn't align, it didn't force or plead. It simply moved on, with grace, with resolve. The body, too, began to respond to this new inner climate. Where once there was tension, there was now breath. Where once fatigue echoed from emotional labor, now there was energy preserved through clarity. Every cell learned to trust again, not in others, but in the self. In the knowing that one's peace is not a privilege granted by others, but a birthright reclaimed by choice. The soul stopped arguing with the past. It stopped replaying the conversations that never went differently, the relationships that never healed, the apologies that never came. It realized that healing is not dependent on others seeing the pain they caused. It comes from seeing it oneself and deciding to no longer live from that wound, to love from the scar instead, quietly, courageously. And slowly others noticed. They sensed the change not in words, but in energy. The way the soul moved in rooms unshaken by chaos, unhooked from drama. Some misunderstood it as detachment. Others mistook it for arrogance. But a few recognized it as liberation, and those few, they stayed. They mirrored the same calm, carried the same clarity. They did not demand, they did not drain. They simply stood beside, not to fix or fill, but to walk alongside. This new life was not free of challenges, but each challenge was met with presence, not panic. The soul no longer collapsed under pressure, no longer abandoned itself in the face of conflict. It asked, "What is true for me?" before it acted. It checked its alignment before it committed. It trusted its no as much as its yes. It stopped waiting for perfect timing. It moved when the moment called. It stopped asking for signs and started becoming one. The hesitation that once kept it frozen dissolved into momentum. Not frantic motion, but deliberate steps. Even rest became purposeful. Not escape, but restoration. Even solitude was no longer emptiness, but fullness without noise. There were days when the old patterns tried to return, whispers of unworthiness, flashes of self-doubt. But now they were met with compassion, not condemnation. The soul held them like a mother holds a child's fear, not dismissing, but not agreeing. And slowly those voices faded, not erased, but no longer leading. Forgiveness came too. Not as an event, but as an unfolding. It came not for others, but for the self. For all the times the soul betrayed its own knowing, tolerated what hurt, dimmed its own light. Forgiveness was not about excusing harm. It was about freeing the self from the prison of replay. And with each layer released, space was made for more joy, more ease, more truth. Creativity blossomed in this space, not for applause or validation, but as expression. The soul no longer asked, "Will this be liked?" but instead, "Is this mine to give?" It painted, wrote, danced, spoke, not to perform, but to pour. From the overflow, not the emptiness. From inspiration, not desperation. The world remained unpredictable. People still disappointed. Plans still shifted. But the soul, now grounded, flowed with life rather than against it. It trusted the timing. It trusted the detours. It no longer panicked in uncertainty. It paused, it listened, and always the whisper remained. Nothing and nobody will ever hurt you again. Because now, the soul no longer hands itself over to be harmed. It sees, it discerns, it chooses. It doesn't wait to be saved. It protects itself, speaks for itself, honors itself, not as defense, but as devotion, self-devotion. The kind that is rooted, not rigid. The kind that softens, not hardens. The heart, once wide open without direction, now opens with discernment. It does not close in fear. It filters in wisdom. It welcomes what nurtures and releases what drains. Love now is sacred. Not because it's rare, but because it is no longer confused with attention, attachment, or adrenaline. It is quiet, steady, expansive. And finally, the soul learns to be happy without needing a reason. Joy is no longer delayed until someone returns, until something is achieved, until someday arrives. Joy becomes the now. The cup of tea held in both hands, the breeze through the window, the silence between songs. Peace becomes the default, not the goal. And in this peace, there is a deep, undeniable truth. A strength so silent it needs no defense. A clarity so sharp it cuts through illusion. A love so whole it doesn't grasp or beg, it simply is. This is not perfection. This is not invincibility. This is self-ownership, sovereignty, home. And from this home, the soul finally understands nothing and nobody will ever hurt you again. Not because the world won't try, but because you will no longer let it. There comes a moment in life, not marked by grand events or loud realizations, when the soul quietly reclaims itself. It doesn't arrive with certainty, nor does it shout its truth. Instead, it begins as a subtle shift, a quiet refusal to be available for pain that was once tolerated under the guise of love, loyalty, or obligation. This moment is not born of vengeance or bitterness, but of deep clarity. It is the point at which the self silently but powerfully declares, nothing and nobody will ever hurt me again. The wounds were never random. They were invitations, unwelcome yet revealing, pulling back the veil on beliefs long held, identities long mistaken for the self. These wounds taught survival, taught adaptation. They forced the soul to contort, to make itself smaller, more pleasing, more digestible. But survival isn't peace, and adaptation isn't wholeness. Healing begins when these truths are seen without flinching. The painful patterns of overgiving, of self-abandonment, of enduring what should never be endured, are no longer normalized. They are questioned gently but firmly. The soul begins to remember what it knew before the world told it to forget. It remembers its boundaries, its voice, its worth. No longer seeking external permission to feel safe, it builds a sanctuary within. This inner ground is not guarded by harsh walls, but by clear decisions. The soul learns that saying no is not cruelty, that leaving is not failure, and not explaining is not rudeness, but self-respect. There's no need to convince, to defend, to chase understanding. The self becomes enough. There is a distinct freedom in no longer craving to be understood by those unwilling to see. Misinterpretation loses its power. Misjudgment becomes irrelevant. The soul stops hemorrhaging energy, trying to fit into spaces that were never meant to hold it. It exits rooms that echo with dissonance and steps into silence. Not the silence of suppression, but the silence of sovereignty. The transformation isn't loud. The world may not notice at first. Life continues with its chaos, its unpredictability. People still come with their inconsistencies. Challenges still arrive without warning. But everything is different now. The internal compass no longer spins from outside forces. It points inward. The decisions now stem from groundedness, not desperation, from self-awareness, not fear. Forgiveness arises naturally, not forced, not declared, but lived. It is the quiet act of releasing resentment to preserve one's peace, not because the past was fair, but because reliving it is no longer necessary. The self no longer waits for apologies to heal, for closure to move forward. It grants itself the freedom to stop carrying what others handed over in carelessness. This version of the self loves differently, not from emptiness or a need to be filled, but from abundance. It gives without losing. It receives without guilt. It no longer romanticizes chaos or confuses intensity with intimacy. Love becomes grounded, not grasping, calm, not conditional, and it is offered first and foremost inward. The soul finds beauty in solitude, not isolation, but sacred aloneness. It becomes a place of renewal, not punishment. In this space, the self reconnects with its own rhythm, its own voice, its own essence. There is no fear of missing out because nothing outside is more valuable than the peace within. Old triggers lose their grip. The people and patterns that once created storms now pass like wind through branches. The emotional hooks have been removed, the reactions no longer automatic. What once pierced now passes unnoticed. The soul has developed discernment, not suspicion, but clarity. It sees what aligns and what does not, and it no longer debates. There is no list of rules, no performance to maintain. This is not a script. It is a state of being. Integrity becomes effortless. Boundaries become organic. Decisions are made with ease, not anxiety. The soul is not perfect, but it is present, not invulnerable, but deeply anchored. The beauty of this evolution is not in becoming untouchable, but in becoming deeply, consciously whole. Pain may still visit, but it no longer takes up residence. Discomfort may knock, but it is no longer given a key. The self feels fully, but it no longer dissolves. It honors every emotion without being consumed by it. Power returns, not the kind that dominates, but the kind that radiates. It is silent but unmistakable. The kind of power that walks into a room without needing to control it. The kind that chooses peace over pride, distance over dysfunction, alignment over approval. The kind that no longer trades authenticity for belonging. This is what it means to heal. Not to erase the past, but to rise from it unchained. Not to never feel pain, but to stop being defined by it. The self, once scattered across broken expectations and unmet needs, is now gathered whole. What was once a battlefield is now a sanctuary. That's how And from this sanctuary, the soul no longer fears who might enter. It trusts itself to see, to choose, to act, to welcome those who nourish, and to release those who drain. There is no longer a hunger for validation, only a quiet satisfaction being real. There is no longer desperation for connection, only a readiness for what aligns. So the world can do as it will. The winds may shift, the tides may turn, but the soul, now sovereign, will remain unshaken. Because the deepest truth is no longer something to be earned, it is simply lived. Thanks for watching. Please share this video with your friends and family members.